reason that you're here is because you either have a love for God and you want to connect to that, or maybe you're here and like you just feel like there's something in your marriage that just could use some help. And so I'm not going to share with you like my wisdom because that's not really that beneficial. But we are going to look at what the Bible says, and we're going to look at some of the things that I believe he's taught me through it, and hopefully I'll be able to have a perspective that is unique and maybe a different way to look at it for you that will be of benefit. Because, my wife and I, we've been married for a short 16 months. And sometimes when I talk to people who've been married a little bit longer, like my parents or, even other people who've been married for 10, 15, 20 years, sometimes you can just kind of forget what some of those differences were like when you were first married, right? Like, you can kind of forget just how different things were. Things that were so important that first month, things that were so important that second month, they just aren't as important anymore. And for me, it's kind of true because Jen and I are very different people. I mean, like, we're very different people. We both grew up in very different environments. I grew up in, like, suburbia and small towns. Jen grew up in South San Diego. I'm talking, like, South San Diego. I grew up in not just a Christian home, but, like, a pastor's home. So, like, I was at church every single opportunity. Like, every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesdays. Like, anytime there was an activity, I had to be there. Jen didn't grow up in that environment. It's just not, the home that she grew up in. In high school, when I was going to the local drugstore soda fountain, yeah, that's right, you heard me right. I'm not like, having a moment where I'm reflecting my grandpa's childhood, like literally, like all-American boy, like I'm going to like the drugstore soda fountain. My wife is going to nightclubs in TJ. Like that's like the difference between my wife and I. And the thing is, we get along so great that sometimes I just kind of forget, like, man, there's some big differences between us. But they were never more on display than a few weeks back during halftime at the Super Bowl. Halftime of the Super Bowl starts, and I'm enjoying the game. Jen is enduring the game. She's not like a big football fan. But then, like, we both can see eye to eye, and the halftime show is pretty cool. And don't get me like it wasn't that great. Katy Perry came out on a giant lion. How cool is that, right? It was a giant lion that she came like riding in on. Like that doesn't happen every day. And then Lenny Kravitz comes out and he's playing the same song that he played 15 years ago. And in fact, he's wearing the same clothes he wore 15 years ago. 15 years, that guy hasn't changed like one bit. Like it's kind of neat. But then it happened. The moment that I was just reminded, Jen and I are different people. Missy Misdemeanor Elliott comes busting out onto the stage, and I'm immediately reminded. I married a hood rat. Like, that's who I married. Seriously, like, immediately. No joke. Jen is, like, rapping along with every single lyric, both good and bad. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my wife. I am scared that she's about to hop up and start, like, sea walking across the living room floor. It was just like, I didn't know what to do. And for, like, the next week, it just, like, reignited this passion she had for early 2000s rap. If that's a thing. And so one morning, as I'm sitting there and I'm listening to her get ready in the bathroom, she's got, it's like 50 Cent or something like that on. I'm in another room listening to an NPR broadcast, and I'm thinking to myself, man, we are very different people, right? Like, I'm NPR, she's, G-Unit, like, that's just different things. In fact, as I think about it, I'm convinced that had Jen and I met in high school or junior high, we would not have been friends. Like, it just would not have happened. She would have thought I was super lame because I was involved in things like student government, like writing for the school newspaper. And I would have thought she was like way too into the party scene. Like, there's just big differences. In fact, just to kind of show you like what we're working with, this is a picture of Jen when she was junior high. There she is in the middle, thugging it up. I can say that she's not in the room. But there she is in the middle. And then this is me. Also on the same stage of life. And I like to think I'm kind of like a fine wine. I just get better, as the years go by. But seriously, like Jen and I, we would not have been friends. Like we probably would have not connected had we met 10 years earlier. It just wouldn't have happened because we're very different people. And the thing is, despite time, despite the evolution of personality, there are still like dramatic differences between Jen and myself. We just still happen to be different people. Like when it comes to television, we do not see eye to eye. Give me an Aaron Sorkin drama. Like give me The West Wing all day long. I will watch that. But Jen, she wants to watch something like Grey's Anatomy, and I hate that show. Like it's just like that's what she loves, that's what I love. We don't see eye to eye. when it comes to like, what are we going to do in our free time? She wants to take me shopping. Ugh, I mean, that's like, seriously, that's like the 8th level of Dante's hell, right? Like that's like the last place I want to be. But I want to go hiking, and she hates that. Like, she doesn't want to go out into the great outdoors. Every now and then when she does convince me to go shopping with her, it just seems to be this constant dialogue where I'm asking, like, hey, what's the most economical decision? Like, what would Dave Ramsey do in this situation? And my wife, on the other hand, is like, hey, what decision is going to drain our bank account the fastest? Like, okay, like, that's not really fair. She doesn't ask that, but she is asking the question, like, what is the highest quality that's not going to break down in the next, 6 months? Like, that's just how we see things differently. And the thing is, you might be in a similar situation. Your marriage, your relationship, you might have great differences. And differences can be a lot like music. Sometimes when there's differences, it creates harmony and things are great. But sometimes when there's differences, they're going to create dissonance. And it can just be that, oh, that does not sound right. And maybe you're at that place. Maybe when it comes to parenting, you and your spouse do not see eye to eye. You're all about like, hey, we've got to hold the line. We've got to punish. And maybe your spouse is like, no, we've got to be nicer than that. Like, maybe you don't see eye to eye. Maybe when it comes to money, maybe he's a little bit more like, hey, let's just spend whatever we've got. And maybe she's a little bit more like, hey, we need to make sure that we have a savings account. And we don't know what tomorrow is, and we need an emergency account. Like, maybe you don't see eye to eye on money. And that's creating dissonance. It's creating issues. Maybe when it comes to leisure, even things you would think you would never fight about. When it comes to how are we going to spend our Saturday, maybe you're a little bit more of a weekend warrior that says, let's get out, let's conquer the elements, let's get out, let's go hiking, let's go fishing, let's do something fun with our weekend. And maybe the other person's like, no, I'd rather just hang out on the couch. I want to rest up. It's a hard week at work. And you find yourself just creating dissonance. There seems to be differences. Or maybe when it comes to even entertainment, like, what are we going to watch tonight? What movie are we going to go see? You find yourself disagreeing on this all the time. I mean, am I striking a chord here? Is this making sense for some of you? You're like, yeah, it's like you were there this morning. See, within human nature, there's always going to be differences. There's always going to be things that you do not see eye to eye on. And the temptation within ourselves is to isolate ourselves to the place where these differences start to erode the friendship. It starts to erode the relationship until eventually you're no longer husband and wife, you're just roommates. You share an address. It's just a place where you guys both go at the end of the day. But you don't really talk to each other. You don't really spend time together. The only thing that you're looking forward to is getting away for the weekend with your friends. The only thing that she's looking forward to is getting away with the weekend with her friends. Maybe you're trying to drown yourself in, like maybe what our kids are doing. Maybe you're trying to just distract yourself with all the other little peripheral things in life. But when it comes down to it, is there a relationship in your home? There isn't one. Because over time, you let those differences drive you apart. But I'm going to tell you right now, isolation and loneliness is a terrible place to be. And to understand this, we need to go back, and I mean like way, way back, to the beginning of beginnings. We see in the early chapters of Genesis, the story of how God has created all things, we see 7 times God creates something. So he forms the earth. He separates the land from the water. He puts stars in the sky. He puts the moon in the sky. He puts the sun. He starts creating birds, fish, animals. He starts putting it all together. The vegetation comes to life. And 7 times we see this happen. God creates. God declares that it is good. God creates. He says that it is good. God creates. He says that it is good. This happens 7 times, except one time. There's one instance that we see in these early chapters of Genesis where God said it wasn't good. And now this is before sin has entered the world. This is before the brokenness of life that seems to have come up. This is before all of that. So we're talking a perfect world. It says in Genesis 2:18, Adam is alone in the garden. It's only man at this point. There's no woman. There's no wife. It's only Adam. It says, it is not good for the man to be alone. It's not good. It's not good for the man to be alone. It's not good for this guy to be in isolation. It's not good for this man to be cut off from other relationships. And this actually harkens back to an angel's principle that even God himself lives in community. God himself lives in relationship. If you go even just a chapter before that, before God even declares it is not good, we see in Genesis 1:26, and this is really important. I want you to look at the pronouns. I know that, so what's a pronoun? I'll explain it, don't worry. It says in Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our own image. This is very, very important. Some of you might have missed it just now. He did not say, let me make man in my own image. God said, let us make man in our own image. Who's the other people in this equation? Who are the other individuals? God himself lives in relationship. We believe in something called the Trinity. And the Trinity is this. God is one, but he's also three. It's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Even within the Godhead, he lives in relationship. And as he made us in his own image, he has designed us in a very similar fashion. You were made for relationships. Even in paradise, even in the perfect world, loneliness is a terrible thing. When you think about it, Adam had everything he could ever need. Everything was provided for him. He had all the food he would ever need. He had all the water he would ever need. He never had to iron his own shirts, right? Like, Adam was naked. He didn't have shirts. Kind of loses something when I explain the joke. Sorry about that. But he didn't have to iron his shirt because he was naked. He had all the stuff. Adam had all the stuff. But something wasn't right. And what was it? There was a void in his life. There was a void. God made him for relationships. God made him to have a friendship, and there wasn't one. It was not good that man was alone. Which proves this. No matter how much we try and convince ourselves otherwise, your relationships are far more important than your stuff. Your relationships are far more important than your stuff. Have you ever met a recluse? I mean, chances are you haven't. That's why they're a recluse. They try and avoid situations like that. But if you've ever seen a recluse on television, or if you've ever maybe read about one, they're weird, man. Recluses are weird. And the reason why they're weird is because there's a major hole in their life. There is something that's just not right. And we all instinctively know this. So much of our society is designed around you getting into a relationship. You want to go to Tinder, you want to go to Match.com, you want to go to eHarmony, all these dating websites, all these different apps. They exist to pair you with somebody else. Why? Because we all know that there's a longing in my heart for a relationship. There's a longing in my soul for friendship. You go to bars, you go to nightclubs, you go to coffee shops, you go to different clubs within the community. They exist because we all instinctively know, I need to surround myself with other people. I need to live in a relationship. And so way back in the beginning of beginnings, Adam is living with a void in his life. There is no woman. There is no relationship. There is nobody else in the garden. It is just him by himself. And God says it is not good for man to be alone. So what God does is God puts a deep sleep onto Adam and actually says that he removes one of Adam's ribs and he forms woman. He forms Adam's soon-to-be wife. And then as Adam wakes up, he looks at her, and this is sometimes missed as we read the Bible because most of us don't speak Hebrew. But Adam actually sings a love song to his wife. The first time he meets her, he sings her a love song. And he sings to her, I'm not going to sing it, but he sings, "This is bone of my bone, and this is flesh of my flesh." Or another way to look at this is what Adam is saying is meeting you, it fills the void in me. Meeting you fills the void in me. And for many of you, when you walked down the aisle and you said, "I do," or when you first started dating that person, you felt that same way. You're like, you know what? Meeting this person is filling the void in me. I knew I had a need for this, and now it's filled. But over time, as the differences started to pile up, as you started to dig your heels in a little bit more, and pride started making you puff up your chest and say, "No, we're holding the line," that friendship, that relationship, maybe started to break apart. Which kind of proves this, that if you want your marriage to work, marriage starts first as a friendship. Marriage must be a friendship. Marriage must be a friendship. Later in the Old Testament, in the book of Song of Solomon, the writer says this, "This is my lover. This is my friend. This is my lover. This is my friend." But what is friendship? We throw this word around so loosely. We go into Facebook and we have 1,500, 2,000 friends, right? But do you really know them? Do you really connect with them? And chances are you don't. You just don't have that many friends. But we throw the term around so loosely that many times we don't really know what it means to be a friend. We don't know what that is like. And so according to the Bible, I did some research, and according to the Bible, there are several attributes of friendship. We're going to look at 3 of them. But the first is this, is that, rather than me just telling you, let me read Proverbs 17:17. It says, a friend is always loyal, and a brother is born to help in time of need. So friend, first of all, he's always loyal. In Proverbs 14:20, it says, the poor are despised even by their neighbors, while the rich have many friends. And so the first attribute of friendship is this. Real friendship is constant. Real friendship is constant. In spite of your financial setting, in spite of your financial prowess, a friend will stay close to you. Whether you're in the best of times or the worst of times, a real friend will stay with you through it all. If you want to be a friend, a real friend is constant. A real friend never leaves. But that's not it. That's not the only thing that friendship is. Proverbs 27:6 says, wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. So how does iron sharpen itself? Well, it gets rubbed against another piece of iron. And as friction happens, as conflict happens, that's when sharpening occurs. So not only is real friendship constant, but real friendship is also transparent. When you're in a real, authentic friendship, you are giving that other person permission to speak into your life. When you are in a real, authentic friendship, you are giving that person permission to tell you what's working and what's not working in your life. In your marriage, if you want to be friends with your spouse, you are giving them permission to tell you, that was dumb. That's what you're doing. You're giving your spouse permission to say, that's not a great idea. I wouldn't do it that way. That is what real friendship is. It's constant, it never leaves, it's never going away, but it's also transparent. It's giving them permission to tell you when you have tacos in your teeth. That's right, like you have some in your teeth. A good friend will tell you, you got something green there, right? Like that's what you want to hear. Though there is actually another quality to friendship that's a little bit harder to just wrap up in a single word. I'm not really sure how to categorize it into one clean phrase. So let me just go to what Tim Keller writes in The Meaning of Marriage. He writes, friendships are discovered more than they are created at will. They arise between people who discover that they have common interest in and longings for the same things. C.S. Lewis, he put it this way. He goes, while erotic love can be depicted as two people standing side by side looking at one another, friendship can be depicted as two people standing side by side looking at the same object and being stirred and enhanced by it together. So the paradox of friendship is this, is that friendship cannot exist for itself. You can't just be friends for the sake of being friends. There has to be common interests. There has to be common passions. You need things in common for a relationship to work. It must be about something else, something that both friends are committed to and passionate about besides just one another. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he actually wrote it this way. It says, do you love me? Means, do you see the same truth? The man who agrees with us that some question, little regarded by others, is of great importance, he can be our friend. And that is why those pathetic people who simply want friends, they can never make any. The very condition of having friends is that we should want something else besides friends. And we all instinctively know that this is true. We all get this at some level. Making friends as an adult seems to be a lot harder, isn't it? It just seems to be a lot harder as an adult. But when we were kids, it just seemed like you could make friends with anybody. I love what Jerry Seinfeld said. He's like, when you were a kid, what were the qualifications for friendship? It's like, if somebody's in front of my house right now, boom, there, right now. That guy is my friend. It's like, hey, are you a grown-up? No, awesome, let's go inside. Let's jump on the bed. Let's play around. And then if you have anything in common at all, you like cherry soda? I like cherry soda. We can be best friends, right? That's what making friends was like as a kid. But as an adult, it just seems so much harder. In fact, you probably look back at your life and you notice that a lot of the best friends in your life were the friends that you ran around with in high school. They're the friends you ran around with in college or even sometimes junior high. And why is that? Because as a kid, your net was a lot wider. But as an adult, whether you want it to be true or not, you start to get a little bit more particular about your opinions. You start to get a little bit more particular about your hobbies and your passions and your interests. And we are a society, we're a nation right now of adults who are lonely and looking for a friendship, looking for somebody that we can connect with. Because we all know this is true. We all know it's true that friendship cannot be only about itself. There has to be shared interests, and there has to be shared passions. So you might be in a marriage right now where you're like, we don't see eye to eye on anything. It just seems like every single piece of our marriage and our life just does not gel. It does not work. Well, I would challenge you, what you need to do this week is you need to disregard the 99% of the things you disagree on. Find that 1%. Find the 1% of the things that you can agree on and spend 99% of your time on it. All right? Spend 99% on that 1%. Because the second thing that you need to make your friendship work, make sure that your marriage works, is that your marriage must be more important to you than any other relationship on earth. Your marriage must be more important to you than any other relationship on earth. Or maybe another way to look at that statement is you need to ask yourself the question, why am I married? Why am I committing myself for the rest of my life to this person? Within society, there's oftentimes like extremes on either side of the debate. And in ancient times, and not even just in ancient times, but sometimes in other parts of the world, marriage is seen as almost a business transaction. It's seen as a way that I'm going to expand my influence or my territory. I'm going to get a wife because I need to be in with the in-laws. Our tribes will come together and we can now live in harmony. In fact, that's one of the reasons why it was so significant that the author of Song of Solomon would say, not only is he my lover, but he's also my friend, because in that day and age, the common treatment of marriage was a business transaction that would expand your influence. Which most of us sit here and we think, well, that's ridiculous. Like, that's crazy. I'm so glad that we're not like that today. But I would say 21st century America, what we are is on another extreme when it comes to the question of why am I married? Why am I committed to this person? In our society, what we do is we put too high of a value on sexual attraction and sexual chemistry. We put too much of a value on what can I get from this relationship. In fact, for some of us in this room, we're like, that wasn't true for us, that wasn't true for me. Like, by and large, this isn't true for everybody. But oftentimes, men seem to overvalue beauty, but women tend to overvalue wealth. And what happens in our society is that we find ourselves at a point where we say, why am I married? And the answer when we first committed ourselves was, well, she was just really hot. And her answer might have been, well, I knew that I would be taken care of for the rest of my life. But one of the things that you'll start to notice that if you build your marriage solely on sexual chemistry, if you build your marriage solely on how is this going to affect me financially, it will fail. It will run out. It cannot be committed to just that right there. Because God has not designed us that way. God's designed us for relationships. So for us to have a friendship that works, for us to have a marriage that works, our marriage, our relationship with our spouse needs to be the most important relationship on this planet. It needs to be the most important relationship on this planet. It needs to be more important to you than your job. It needs to be more important to you, this is going to sound really controversial, even more important to you than your kids. Your commitment to each other needs to be the most important relationship in your life. That's not to say you don't love your kids. You love your kids. But you make the commitment first to your spouse. That is where you start. That is where you finish. Proverbs 2:17. It uses a Hebrew word, aluf, to describe your spouse as a companion. It translates as special confidant or best friend. And frankly, isn't that what we're looking for? At the end of the day, when we feel that void in our life, what we're really feeling is that void of relationship. We're feeling that void of friendship. And I would wager that if you're sitting here right now and you think about your marriage, you think about your potential marriage, you think about the person that you are thinking about spending the rest of your life on, or the rest of your life with, what you need to ask yourself is, this person, do they have the potential to be my best friend? Does this person have the potential to be my confidant? Is this person somebody that I can use as my companion? And if they can't, if that's not what they live up for and you're not married yet, you probably should move on from them. You probably should end it. Because if they can't be your best friend, it's just not going to work. But for those of you in this room, who you did get married for one of those reasons, and you're like, man, what do I do now? I'm telling you, the answer is not divorce. That'll just make life more complicated. That's not the solution for you. The solution is really developing that friendship. And here's some good news. If you got married and like the main reason is just the sexual chemistry, the sexual attraction, there's this interesting thing that happens over time. As you spend more and more time with somebody, as you develop that friendship, the attraction actually starts to grow. And this is something I'm banking on, all right? Because I took my shirt off a few days ago, and I'm like, oh, that's not looking as good as it did 16 months ago when Jen and I got married. And the thing is, despite the fact that I'm eating better than I've ever eaten, despite the fact that I'm even more active than I probably have ever been active in my life, it just seems like the pounds start to pack on. Am I right? Is anybody else with me? But my wife tells me, Matt, you're just so attractive. And I believe her. And not because I'm an idiot, which I am, but the reason I believe her is because I believe that our friendship is so strong that despite some of my, physical shortcomings, Jen looks at me and she thinks I'm attractive. Because we have a friendship. Because we have a great relationship. I believe her. So you need to answer this question. What is my marriage for? Is it only for sexual chemistry or is it only for financial gain? Because if it is, it's probably not going to work. So the centerpiece of your marriage, when it comes to what is a great friendship within your marriage, I believe what you need is a genuine Christian friendship. That needs to be at the heart of your marriage. And it doesn't develop overnight. It takes time to develop. Interestingly enough, Jen is already a different person than the woman I married. It's just 16 months, she's already a different person. And I know that I'm already a different person as well. When we first got married, I didn't realize I was going to think Jen was so funny. I just didn't know that I was going to spend my nights just laughing at some of the things she says and some of the things she does. I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know that when we first got married that I was going to appreciate her insight and appreciate the things that she speaks into my life. I did not realize that this was going to be here, but the reason why I am able to see these things and the reason why I'm able to connect with her is because we have made friendship at the center of our marriage. We have made Christian friendship at the center of our marriage. And one thing that I've noticed is that if I make Jesus my everything, and Jen makes Jen her everything, or Jen makes Jesus her everything, then suddenly we can be everything to each other. If I make Jesus my everything and Jen makes Jesus her everything, then we can be the everything to each other. You want to have a great, rock-solid, common interest and passion? I believe for us it starts with our love and passion for God. It starts with our love and passion for Jesus and the church and the Bible and everything that He would have for us. And that's what works for us, and maybe that can work for you. But I believe that no matter who you are or where you're at, if you commit yourself to friendship, if you commit yourself to growing in your love of Christ together, those differences that seem to create so much dissonance right now, they might start to create some harmonies. And you'll find yourself changing over time. And suddenly the things that you were willing to die on a hill for early on in your marriage, or even a month ago or 2 months ago, suddenly you find your mind changing on it. Before I got married, I lived like the dream of every 9-year-old, like the way I ate. I ate they knew me by name at Taco Bell, right? That was me. I ate peanut butter crunch every morning for breakfast. And I'm like, this is healthy, right? It's got peanuts in it. That's something that's growing in the ground. I'm like, this is great. And then I get married, and Jen's a little bit more health conscious than me. And at first I was like, what in the world? She's trying to get rid of my peanut butter crunch. I can't believe this is happening. But next thing I know, here I am 16 months later, and I'm eating something called quinoa. I don't even know what quinoa is. I don't know where it came from. But you know what? I think that it's a little delicious now, and I find myself getting healthier as a result of that. She's making me drink something called kale. We're blending kale. We're taking leaves off of a plant, and we're blending it. And I find myself enjoying it. This wouldn't have happened had I not committed myself not just to God, but committed myself to the friendship within our marriage. Committed myself to the friendship. And so you might find yourself here this morning, and you're thinking to yourself, Matt, my marriage can be characterized as nothing like friendly. It's definitely not friends who live together. It's not people who are committed to God and committed to each other. We're just different. And I don't think it's going to work for us. I don't think it's going to work. I just want to ask this question. Just think about this. If splitting apart, is that going to make your life better, or is it going to make your life more complicated? If splitting apart, is that going to make your life better, or is it going to make it harder? Are you willing to endure the pain of breaking it apart? Is that really what you want? Because I know in a moment of desperation, we can oftentimes say, this is the best scenario, I just got to do it. And, if you're in an abusive relationship, seriously, get out of that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when there's differences of opinion, differences of opinion in your life. Maybe there's a long line of hurts, but at your heart of your hearts, you know that you really don't want to end it. You don't want to rip this thing apart and try and start over. You know that's not what you want. You know that as you look back at the early parts of your marriage, you're like, I want to recapture that. I want to recapture what it was like when we were dating, when we seemed to like each other. What I think you should do is I think you should commit yourself to being a friend, not the way that I'm a friend, not the way that my wife's a friend to me, but the way that Jesus is a friend to us. And I know this might seem really cliche. I know it might seem like, well, yeah, that's what you would say at church. But I think if you really do this, it has the potential to radically change your marriage. When you actually look at how Jesus pursues us, and you apply the same principle to how you pursue your spouse, I believe that your life will change. And so how did he pursue us? How does he have a friendship like us? Well, I want you to look at this verse. This is Romans 5:10. It says, for since our friendship with God was restored, so the friendship had to have been broken, now it is restored by the death of his son. While we are still his enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of his son. No matter where you're at in your marriage, whether you guys are, arch nemesis right now, or whether you guys are best friends, if the relationship is fractured in any way, it is not irreconcilable. And why? Because the same Spirit that rose Christ from the dead now resides in us and gives us the power to see restoration happen even in our marriages. It happened for Christ in us. It can happen with you in your marriage. In fact, it's worded differently in Ephesians 5:25, but the same principle says, for husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her. So the way that you can be a friend to your spouse, the way that Jesus is a friend to you, is, I just pulled out 3 things. I'm sure you can find more, but these are the 3 things that I think if you commit yourself to, if you'll be a friend the way that Jesus is a friend to us like this, your marriage will be changed. The first thing is this: Jesus has endless grace for you. You need to have endless grace for your spouse. Now here's what I mean by this. Don't give up. Do not give up. Even when you love and your love is exchanged for hate, do not give up. Christ has endless love for you. He has endless grace for you. Have endless grace for your spouse. Truthfully, your spouse probably doesn't deserve a second chance, but neither did you. But Christ pursued you regardless. Have endless grace for your spouse the way that Christ has endless grace for you. The second thing that we can be a friend like Christ is a friend is Jesus sacrificed for us. So we should sacrifice for our spouse. Now, I'm not saying cut open a goat and give it to her. That would be weird. Don't do that. But the way that you can sacrifice for your spouse is you can give up your right to be right, even when you are. Think about that. Give up your right to be right, even when you are. You're making a sacrifice. You are pursuing your spouse like Jesus pursued you. Look for ways to return generosity for their selfishness. Look for ways to exchange the love for their hate. And here's what's going to happen. Here's what could very likely happen. You're going to say, all right, Matt, I'm going to try this. And tomorrow, you're going to do something that's going to cost you energy. You're going to do something that costs you time. It might even cost you resources. You're going to do something that's going to be way out of your character, and you're going to give it to your spouse. They'll receive it, and they're not going to appreciate it. But that's okay. That's okay. I think that if you make this a relentless part of your life, or if you do not give up on it, you keep giving and sacrificing for your spouse, over time, I believe that has a way to pierce the hardest of hearts. The way that Christ's sacrifice has pierced our hard hearts as well. And the third way that you can be a friend like Jesus is a friend to us, is you need to meet your spouse on their level. Jesus left the glories of heaven to come down and live life as a man here on earth. We don't really realize how big of a deal it is. He came from heaven where he was worshipped nonstop to live with us, to live in a broken and dirty world in the first century. He didn't come and start living in Upper East Side apartment. He came down to live in first century Israel. He gave up the glories of heaven for us. So you must also meet your spouse on their level. By and large, men and women are different. I know it's an understatement. But men and women approach friendship differently. By and large, not true in every case, but in most cases, women connect face to face. And that's why when women get together, what do? They go to a restaurant, they go get coffee, and they sit across from each other, and they talk. So men, if you are trying to connect with your spouse, if you're going to meet your spouse on their level, what you're not going to do this week is you're not going to take her fishing. She's not going to want that. You're not going to take her hiking. You're not going to take her to a game. What are you going to do? You're going to take her to coffee. You're going to take her to dinner, you're going to sit across from the table, and you're going to ask, how was your day? And here's the thing, here's the important part. You got to stop and just listen. All right? Don't fix it. Don't try and let me tell you why that was dumb. What you need to do is just stop and listen. Meet her on her level. Ladies, if you want to connect with your husbands, men by and large do not connect face to face. We connect shoulder to shoulder. That's why when guys get together to connect, what do? We go golfing. We go to a baseball game. We go get wings at Buffalo Wild Wings. We do these kind of things. Why? Because we want to connect shoulder to shoulder. So ladies, if you're trying to connect with your husband this week, don't take him to get coffee. Don't take him to dinner. Take him fishing. Take him hiking. Be the one who suggests this. Say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do something really crazy. We're going to make the trip over to Arizona, and we're going to watch spring training games, right? This is what we're going to do. We're going to connect. We're going to connect with each other on their level. Because that's how Christ approaches us. What if Crosspoint Church was filled with families and filled with marriages where people didn't love their spouse the way that the world tells us to love our spouses, where it's only based on what can I get out of this? What if we loved our spouses? What if we loved the significant others in our life the way that Christ loved us? Where we were willing to have endless grace with them, where we were willing to sacrifice anything that's needed, where we were willing to meet on their level to create great friendships. How differently would your life be? How differently would this community be? How different would our church be if we were known for approaching each other like this? I believe there are some people in this room where your marriage is on the teetering point of disaster. We're not even sure if it's going to survive. I want to pray for you. I want to pray that God restores your marriage. Some of you are not necessarily at that breaking point, but you're seeing the cracks in the armor. You're seeing how things are just not really working out. I'm going to pray for you as well. Or some of you, you might have a great marriage right now, but that's because you haven't discovered all your differences yet. And I'm going to pray for you that you will make Christ and Jesus the center of your marriage. And you know what? I'm even going to pray for some of you in this room. You're not married, and you're dating somebody. And when asked the question, can this person be my best friend? You're like, no, they're not. I'm going to pray that God gives you the courage to break it off. I know it seems like a weird prayer, but I'm going to pray that God gives you that courage. I know it can be messy. I know it can be bad. But I'm going to pray for you as well.